Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to cover briefly how to set up uh, renderings for doing shadow studies, solar studies. Um, first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and figure out what view I'm trying to do, so that I'm assuming there's a bunch of different solar angles you'll want to choose. So I would choose the kind of critical ones that you think are relevant to the design of the house. Things like whether or not light is entering directly through the breezeway, things like the shading um, on the west side of the house towards this side, where those big trees are and stuff. So the other thing we're going to want to add before we do the rendering is a model of a tree. Now I found one on 3D Warehouse just by searching for tree, and I think you can kind of choose whichever one you want, but you want to choose. So each time you highlight one of these, you'll see a little number in the bottom, 23K, which represents the size of the file. So you will want to pay a little bit of attention to how much detail your model has. You're looking for a 3D model of a tree, and this website's great because it'll actually show you what a preview of the model, and you can tell whether it's 3D or whether it's kind of like a 2D tree. So let me show you two examples so you can kind of distinguish. But you also want to, I would say, choose a model that is relatively small. You don't want like a ton of polygons because that'll really, really slow down your rendering. So in here, if I choose, once I've opened this tree up, I can click on the icon 3D model, wait for it to load a little bit. And now I can kind of orbit around so you can see this tree. It's just two images of a tree intersecting, which might work fine for some images, but we're trying to get this object to actually cast shadows in our scene, which means we actually need geometry for like the leaves and stuff. So we don't want a model that's just like images like this one. And if I were to look at this one, now when I orbit around, you can see there's individual branches, there's individual surfaces for the leaves. So it's not super high poly, but it is geometry, which is important. So I downloaded this one for this tutorial. And again, when you're ready, you just click download and click the little arrow and go to SketchUp 2017. I believe 18 and 19 will not load into Rhino. So choose the oldest one that you can find. That's a SketchUp model. Okay, and then when you have your scene ready, go ahead and go to your folder where you saved that model. It should be a .skp, and you can just drag that into Rhino. Drop it, then under File Options, choose Import. Click OK. Should be able to leave everything here as default. Will come in as a mesh, which is also good because meshes tend to kind of run faster in Rhino, in most software actually. Scale it up to roughly the right size. Then again, so some of the trees you download might come in as block instances. But for this, just kind of place it a little. So I'm going to scale it up to some dimension. And then I want to edit the materials. So when I go to select this, you can see when I click on the different parts of the model, it says 25 meshes added to selection. It doesn't say block instance added to selection. So this is not a block yet, which is fine. So what we could do first is we want to go select both parts of the model, or all the model basically. Go to the Properties panel and click on the little icon that looks like a paint tube and the one that says Material. We're going to reset the materials. So by default, this thing will come in with materials. I'm going to go ahead and reset it. So I'll just click the drop down, click Choose a New Material, and click Custom. And just reset it to like default white. Okay. I can hit Escape. And now I would actually define a block instance, or turn this into a block instance. Because I'm assuming you're going to want to copy your model around, possibly scale it and rotate it. You want to kind of try and match as closely as possible the like the trees that are directly around the house so that you can get somewhat realistic results in terms of shadow. So in order to make this a block, all you got to do is type in the command block. And press enter. Ask for a base point. This doesn't matter too much. I'll just click somewhere near the bottom. Give it a name too. Also doesn't matter too much. Okay. So now, just so you know, if you wanted to edit this at this point, you would want to edit the block. So you would use the command block. Now I'm inside of the block and I could edit the individual parts of the geometry and so on. So go ahead and click OK to close out of that. Alright. The next thing we want to do is set up our render properties. So at the top under render, first of all, make sure you have your current renderer set to Rhino. And then choose this button, Render Properties. That'll open the Options panel. And the main thing here will be to set up the resolution. So the viewport is the default resolution. I want to actually choose custom. So for right now, because I'm kind of doing test renders, and because I'm doing this tutorial, I'm going to keep the resolution low. But for a kind of a final quality image, you would probably turn the quality up to good quality, and you would probably turn the resolution up to about 2000 by 1000. That's a pretty good resolution for the scale that you're printing at. But always remember, the scale of your rendering should be about 150 dpi, so you can always calculate that by multiplying. Okay, if I'm printing an 11 by 17, I would say it was 17 times 150. So that means I want 2550 width, 11 times 150 would want 1650 in height. That's how you would figure out the right resolution to render at. But like I said, for right now, I'm going to keep it low. So let's try like 800. Okay. Then I'll click OK. Then I also want to make sure, so if I have my named views panel open, and you can get to that just by typing named view in the command line. Then I'll select the angle I want. Again, I'm going to try and match up the angle to the line work I already have. Or you can produce new line work for just these images if they're new angles. That you would just follow the previous tutorial in order to do the line work for that. And then I'm also going to kind of zoom out just a little bit so I can get a decent amount of shadows on the topography surface. And then my final step is to set up the sunlight. So I would use the command sun to open up the sun panel. In the sun panel, I'll turn it on first of all. And we probably want to keep it off of manual control. If I scroll all the way down to location, choose Tucson, I can also manually enter the latitude and longitude for precisely where the house is if you guys have that info. And if I scroll up, so I actually find it really useful to go back into top view for this. So I'll reset my viewport to top. Okay, and the reason that I find that useful is as I'm moving around the slider here, you can see up here I'm looking at the altitude angle. That's the angle of the sun coming from the sky, from above. In other words, that's like the kind of elevation. And I'm looking at the azimuth. And because I switched into top view, and my north is lined up to my y direction, I can kind of see what angle the sun's going to come in at. For example, if I'm going to go to, maybe I'll go to June, roughly the 20th, and I'll swing around to early morning. See, I can actually kind of line up that sun, my breezeway, which might be an interesting rendering to do. Okay, so that's just a good way to kind of look at how the angle is going to affect your model. So the other thing you could do is you could swing around to late afternoon. That's where you would get the effect of those shadows to the west where the trees are. Okay, so I'm going to set up the morning one. Again, that's what makes sense for my angle. Make sure you have enough of a kind of solar angle to or enough of an altitude angle to kind of get into the model. Okay, and once I have that set up, I'll just go ahead and throw that back over there. Okay, now I'll go back to my viewport angle. I'll zoom out a little bit again. Oops. Keep messing up. Pressing the wrong button. There we go. Okay. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can kind of see whether there are shadows being cast on the ground over here. And then when I'm ready to render, I just go ahead and hit render and hit render. Because I'm doing draft quality, this should be pretty fast, but you can see the resolution is pretty bad. Anyway, so just wait for it to be done. Kind of see the shadows being cast to the northwest over there. Okay. And when it's done, you go ahead and click save. And then save it out as whatever name. I'd already saved one that's a little bit better quality. Okay. Now, what I would do next is I could go ahead and edit this rendering a little bit. So if I opened it up in Photoshop, bring this rendering into Photoshop, all I really want to do here would just be to bring out a little bit more contrast. You can see my shadows are a little bit dark, or I'm sorry, a little bit light. So I could add an adjustment layer. You could do any one of these four is going to like help you adjust contrast. I might actually choose levels because that gives me enough control to make it darker without losing not making a lot of the lighter areas too dark. Okay, that looks pretty good. And it doesn't have to be perfect, we just want to be able to see where that shadow is. Then I would go ahead and save as. You could save it over the original file or rename it. I would probably rename it just so that we can always go back without rendering. Okay, and then over here in my all these layers back on. So this is the Illustrator file that I created for the views tutorial. So what I would recommend doing is if you have this kind of line drawing produced for each of the axonometric angles, I could simply reopen this file. I would turn off all of my hidden lines in this case. I would also turn off my shading. And I would turn off obviously the diagrammatic layers for the view. Then I could go ahead and bring in that image. Let's drag that in. Okay, so you need to make sure also you're on a layer that isn't locked or hidden. I'm going to make a new layer really quick. There we go. Okay, so now I could go ahead and bring that layer below where my line work is. Then you just want to kind of try and line it up. Now this can be kind of an annoying thing to do, but you just have to kind of scale it and mess with it until it looks about right. Okay. Actually bring it under the contour line as well. And there we go. So you could go ahead and save as, so you don't overwrite your other diagrams. And I would save it as maybe this is solar angle 1 or something. Okay. Just save it as an Illustrator file. Okay, and then that should be it for this tutorial. And I'm going to go ahead and stop this one and then make a new one for the InDesign. So that one will be a separate video.